Sometimes the bravest thing a girl can do is marry someone she doesn't know to help her family. Sometimes the saddest thing a guy can do is wait his whole life for someone tough enough to be his partner. Bo Rollins is a huge cowboy who built his ranch all by himself. He said no to every girl who wanted to marry him because he wants more than just a pretty face. When Annabeth Lane gets off the stagecoach, she's got fancy manners and a heart full of worry. He tells her right away what he expects from a wife. But can this city girl show she's got the strength he's looking for? Before we go on, tell us where you're listening from. And if this story grabs you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow I've got something super cool for you. The dust never stopped in Copper Creek. It floated in the air like old stories, covering everything with a thin layer of dirt that told everyone this was a tough place for tough folks. The town was in a valley between two red rock hills, where the wind blew hard in winter and the sun burned hot in summer. It was the kind of place that either made you stronger or broke you completely. Bo Rollins got stronger. At 34, he was 6 feet 6 inches tall in his socks, with shoulders so wide he had to turn sideways to fit through most doors. His hands were as big as plates, marked with scars from wire fences and cattle brands, rough from 15 years of building something out of nothing. When he walked down Main Street, which wasn't often, people stopped talking, not because they were scared, though some were, but because he earned respect from watching a guy pull himself up and keep going until he owned half the valley. The Rollins Ranch stretched from Copper Creek to Devil's Canyon, 10,000 acres of great grazing land that Bo had bought piece by piece. He started with just his clothes and an old branding iron that was his dad's. That iron now hung above his fireplace, a reminder of where he came from and what he lost. Thomas Rollins died at Gettysburg when Bo was 19, leaving a son with his dad's stubbornness and his mom's smart mind. Mary Rollins died the next winter, some said from sadness, others from a flu that hit the area hard. Either way, Bo buried both parents before he turned 20 and decided he was done losing people he loved. The war came next. 4 years in a blue uniform, fighting in Virginia and Georgia, watching his friends fall like cut grass. He came home with a scar on his ribs from a Confederate sword and a deeper scar in his heart. Some guys came back from war wanting to settle down, find a kind girl, have kids, and forget the sound of cannons. Bo came back wanting only to build something no one could take away. He worked cattle drives for 3 years, saving every cent, sleeping under the stars, eating beans from a can. When old Henrik Morrison decided to sell his ranch and move east to live with his daughter, Bo had enough cash to buy it, the ranch. House was just a small cabin then, 4 rooms with a leaky roof, but it had good water and thick grass. That was 15 years ago. Now the Rollins Ranch was the best in 3 counties, with a house made of strong wood and local stone, big enough for a family that never came. The barn could hold 100 cows through the worst winter, and the bunkhouse fit 8 workers all year. Bo ran 3,000 cows and owned the best breeding bull west of Denver. What he didn't have was a wife. It wasn't because girls didn't try. There was Sarah Henderson, the banker's daughter, who could play piano and speak a bit of French. There was Mary Catherine O'Sullivan, whose dad owned the biggest store in town and could cook a Sunday dinner that'd make you cry. There was even Violet Prescott, who came from St. Louis with her aunt and knew more from books than most guys. Bo dated them all in his own way. He was polite, brought flowers when he thought he should, sat through church events and town dances. But when each girl looked at him with dreamy eyes and soft hopes, when they talked about cozy homes and sweet kids, he felt something like fear in his chest. They wanted a gentleman, someone who'd come home every night to sit by the fire and read Bible verses while his wife sewed. They wanted a guy who'd smile at their paintings or piano playing, who'd nod when they talked about new dresses from the East. Bo needed something different. The frontier wasn't a place for soft girls. He'd seen too many pioneer wives, broken by the loneliness, the harsh weather, the constant danger of Indian attacks or cattle thieves. He'd watched kind women fade under the endless work of running a house without help, raising kids without doctors nearby, standing by their men when things got bad. He needed a teammate, not a pet. someone who could work with him when cows were stuck in a snowstorm, who could shoot a gun if trouble came, who could look at 10,000 acres of tough land and see its beauty, not just its hardness. He needed a woman who knew love out here wasn't about poems and flowers. It was about standing side by side when life tried to knock you over. The problem was, that kind of woman was as rare as rain in August. So Bo did what smart guys do when normal plans fail. He put an ad in Eastern newspapers, looking for a bride who knew what she was getting into. He was honest about what he wanted. A strong body, a willingness to work, no silly dreams about frontier life. In return, he offered safety, protection, and a teamwork that would last as long as they both lived. The replies were mostly disappointing. Most came from girls who thought marrying a rich rancher meant a life of relaxing, with servants and lazy days. A few were from desperate girls, willing to say anything to escape their troubles back east. Only one letter stood out. Miss Annabeth Lane from Philadelphia wrote in neat, educated handwriting about her family's failed business and her need to find a future through marriage. She didn't talk about love or romance, but about hard work, loyalty, and respect. She was 26, a bit older, but not too old. She could read and write, had helped with her dad's business books, and knew frontier life meant giving things up. Most. Importantly, she asked smart questions. What did he expect for running the house? How far was the ranch from town? What was the plan for emergencies? These weren't the questions of a girl dreaming about cowboy heroes and sunset rides. Bo wrote back just as plainly. He sent money for a train ticket and told her to arrive in Copper Creek by October 1st. If they liked each other, they'd marry. Right away. If not, he'd pay for her trip back and give her a little money for her trouble. It seemed like a fair deal between two grown-ups who understood life's hard truths. Now, as he stood at Copper Creek's tiny train station, watching the afternoon train puff away in a cloud of steam and ash, Bo wondered if he'd messed up. The woman who stepped onto the worn wooden platform didn't look like what he expected. Annabeth Lane was short, barely reaching his chest even in her travel boots. Her dress was nice wool in dark blue, with too many buttons and ribbons for out here. Her honey-colored hair was pinned up in a fancy style that probably took her maid an hour to do. She wore gloves that had never seen real work and walked like she'd been taught to balance books on her head. In other words, she looked exactly like the soft, fancy lady he'd spent years avoiding. But when she turned her green eyes to meet his, Bo saw something that made him stop. There was strength under the softness, a backbone that might bend but wouldn't break. She looked at him without backing down, sizing up his huge frame and rough look with a sharp eye that knew how to judge people fast. "Mr. Rollins, I guess," she said, her voice clear with a proper Eastern accent, but none of the nervous giggles he'd expected. "Miss Lane?" He tipped his hat. "I hope the trip wasn't too rough. 3 days on a train is always rough, Mr. Rollins, but I've been through worse." She pointed to a small trunk and a bag by the platform. "I travel light, like you asked." Bo lifted her trunk like it was a bag of grain, noticing she'd kept her word. No big suitcases full of party dresses or fancy shoes. No hat boxes or jewelry cases, just the basics a practical woman would need to start over. As he loaded her stuff into his wagon, Annabeth stood quietly beside him, her hands folded calmly. She didn't chatter nervously or gasp at the scenery. She just waited, watching the town with the same sharp eyes she'd used on him. "It's not much to look at," Bo said, suddenly seeing Copper Creek through her eyes, the dusty main street with a few shops, the adobe church with its bell tower, the scattered houses. After Philadelphia, it must feel like the end of the world. "I didn't come for the view, Mr. Rollins." Annabeth took his hand to climb onto the wagon seat, her grip stronger than he expected. "I came to build a life. Sometimes the best start comes in plain places." As they drove through town toward his ranch, Bo kept sneaking looks at his future bride. She sat straight beside him, her hands steady on her small purse, her eyes taking in everything they passed. When they met townsfolk, she nodded politely but didn't seem to want long chats. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, but it was heavy with questions they hadn't asked yet. Tomorrow they'd stand before Reverend Mackenzie and promise to share their lives. Tonight they were still strangers trying to figure out what they'd gotten into. The sun was setting behind the western hills when they turned up the long road to the Rollins ranch. Bo heard Annabeth's quiet gasp as the house came into view, and he felt a bit proud despite himself. The house stood strong against the red rock cliffs, its stone base and wooden walls showing it was built to last. Lights glowed in the windows, and smoke curled from the chimney where his housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, was cooking dinner. The barn and outbuildings spread out neatly, while cows dotted the fields as far as you could see. "It's beautiful," Annabeth said softly, and for the first time since getting off the train, her calm face showed real feeling. "You've built something." "Amazing here, Mr. Rollins." Bo felt something loosen in his chest. A tightness he hadn't known was there. "I worked hard for it," he said plainly, "and I expect the same from anyone who shares it." She turned to look at him, her green eyes serious. "I wouldn't have come all this way if I wasn't ready to work, Mr. Rollins. The question is, are you ready to let me?" The morning of their wedding was clear and cold, with frost on the hotel windows where Annabeth stayed her first night in town. She stood before a small mirror in her room, fixing a borrowed veil that Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, had insisted she wear. "Every bride needs a veil, dear," the woman had said, handing her the delicate lace the night before. "It was my mom's and her mom's before that. Think of it as a welcome to our town." The veil felt strange against her hair, a reminder of traditions she wasn't sure she could live up to. In Philadelphia, she'd been to weddings where brides glowed with joy, surrounded by families who'd known each other forever. Here she was, about to marry a man she'd met less than a day ago, in front of people still deciding if they liked her. But the marriage paper waiting at the church was more than just a document. It was her rescue and her risk all in one. By signing it, she'd become Mrs. Bo Rollins, in charge of one of the biggest ranches around. Without it, she'd be Miss Annabeth Lane, a problem her family couldn't afford anymore. The walk to the church felt longer than it was. Word spread fast in Copper Creek that the giant rancher was finally getting hitched, and curious faces peeked from windows and doors. As Annabeth walked down Main Street, she kept her chin up and her steps steady, hiding the butterflies in her stomach. The church was small but solid, made of the same red stone as the land around it. Reverend Mackenzie waited at the altar, a kind man with gray whiskers who'd welcomed her warmly the night before. The pews held maybe 30 people, more than Annabeth expected for a quick wedding. Bo stood at the front in his best suit, but he still looked like he belonged outside, not in a church. His huge frame seemed to make the small room feel even smaller, and when he turned to watch her walk up, his face gave nothing away. There was no fancy music or flower girls. Annabeth just walked down the aisle, her hand resting lightly on Mr. Henderson's arm, who'd offered to walk her since her dad wasn't there. The borrowed veil floated behind her, catching the morning light through the church's plain windows. When she reached the altar, Bo stepped forward to take her hand. His palm was warm and rough against her gloved fingers, and she could feel his strength, even though he was careful not to squeeze too hard. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Mackenzie started, his voice filling the small space. "We're here today to see Bo Thomas Rollins and Annabeth Rose Lane get married." The familiar words flowed over Annabeth, but her focus was on the man beside her. Up close, she saw a small scar along his jaw, probably from some old accident. His hair was darker than it seemed yesterday, brown with a bit of early gray at the sides. He smelled like soap, leather, and something strong that made her heart beat faster, even though she was trying to stay practical about this deal. "Do you, Bo Thomas Rollins, take this woman to be your wife, to love and hold, in good times and bad, until death parts you?" "I do," Bo said, his voice steady, his eyes locked on her face. "Do you, Annabeth Rose Lane, take this man to be your husband, to love and hold in good times and bad until death parts you?" The words stuck in her throat for a second. This was the moment she couldn't undo. Once she said them, her old life would be gone forever, replaced by something new and scary and maybe wonderful. "I do," she said, her voice clear and strong. The Reverend smiled and opened his mouth to keep going, but Bo suddenly stepped closer to Annabeth, his hand tightening on hers. The crowd murmured curiously as he looked at her with a fierce gaze that took her breath away. "Before we finish," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone in the church to hear, "I need to say something." Reverend Mackenzie looked surprised. "Mr. Rollins, maybe we should—" Bo's tone was polite, but firm. "She needs to hear this now before she makes her final choice." The church went completely quiet. Annabeth felt everyone staring, but all she could see was Bo's face as he turned to talk to her directly. "Miss Lane, you came here thinking you were marrying a rancher who needed a wife to cook and have kids. That's what my ad said, and that's what I let you think." His grip on her hands was steady, grounding her. "But that's not the whole truth." The crowd whispered softly. Annabeth's heart started racing, but she kept her eyes on his. "I don't want a fancy lady," Bo went on, his voice getting stronger. "I don't want someone who'll sit in the living room sewing while I do all the work. I don't want a decoration or someone who needs protecting from life out here." Sarah Henderson gasped from the third row. Mrs. O'Sullivan made a disapproving noise, but Annabeth found herself leaning closer, pulled in by the fire in his voice. "I want a fighter," Bo said, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "I want someone who'll work with me when the cows are stuck in a snowstorm, who'll stand with me when the bank tries to take our land, who'll help me build something that lasts long after we're gone. I want a woman who cooks not because she has to, but because she knows feeding her family is love. I want someone who will have sons not as a chore, but because she wants to raise strong kids who can handle anything life throws at them." The church was so quiet, Annabeth could hear her own heartbeat. She vaguely noticed shocked faces and whispers starting and stopping, but it all faded as she took in what Bo was saying. "If that's not what you want," he said, his voice softening a bit, "if you came here expecting an easy life with a tame husband who lets you stay soft, then say so now. I'll pay for your trip back east, no hard feelings, but if you say those vows, you need to know what you're signing up for." Annabeth stared up at him, her mind spinning. Every proper part of her screamed she should be shocked, that she should pick up her skirt and walk out of that church. No gentleman talked to a lady like this, especially not in front of the whole town. Her mom would have fainted. Her Philadelphia friends would have been horrified. But something deeper than manners was stirring in her chest, something that had been asleep under layers of good behavior and expectations. As she looked into Bo's eyes, she saw not rudeness, but honesty, not meanness, but hope. He wasn't trying to put her down. He was daring her to be more than she ever thought she could be. The borrowed veil suddenly felt less like tradition and more like a costume she was ready to ditch. The marriage paper wasn't just a legal thing. It was a chance to become someone new. "Are you done, Mr. Rollins?" she asked, her voice clear in the stunned silence. He nodded, a flicker of doubt crossing his face for the first time. "Good," Annabeth said, stepping closer, so close she had to tilt her head back to keep eye contact. "Because I've got something to say, too." Now Bo looked surprised. The crowd leaned forward, hanging on every word. "I didn't come here for an easy life, Mr. Rollins. If I wanted easy, I'd have married Preston Matthews back in Philadelphia. He offered me a life of relaxing with servants and kids, raised by nannies." Her voice grew stronger. "I came here because I want to build something that matters. I want to work for what I have, not have it handed to me. And yes, I want to fight. For this ranch, for this life, and for the man brave enough to ask for a real partner instead of a pretty decoration." The church buzzed with gasps and whispers. Mrs. Henderson fanned herself hard. Some men nodded while their wives looked shocked. "So finish the ceremony, Reverend Mackenzie," Annabeth went on, her eyes still on Bo, "because I know exactly what I'm signing up for, and I can't wait to start." For a moment, Bo's calm face slipped, and Annabeth saw something raw and hopeful in his eyes. Then he smiled, not the polite smile from yesterday, but a real warm one that lit up his whole face. "By the power given to me by the territory of Colorado," Reverend Mackenzie said quickly, clearly wanting to wrap up before more surprises, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Bo's hands came up to hold her face, his thumbs brushing her cheeks as he looked down at her. For a second, the church and crowd vanished, leaving just the two of them in this new beginning. When he kissed her, it wasn't like the quick, formal kisses she'd seen at other weddings. It was strong and warm, full of promise, and she found herself kissing back with surprising passion. When they pulled apart, Annabeth felt out of breath and a bit dizzy, like she'd just signed up for something way more exciting than marriage. The crowd clapped, though some sounded unsure. As Bo tucked her hand into his arm and they turned to face the town, Annabeth saw a few disapproving faces among the smiles. She had a feeling her real challenges were just starting. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Annabeth sat beside her new husband on the wagon seat, super aware of him next to her and the gold ring on her finger. The weight of what they'd said in the church settled around them like road dust. When they got to the house, Bo helped her down from the wagon politely, his hands on her waist as he lifted her easily to the ground. "Mrs. Chen has fixed up the guest room for you," he said, his voice formal. "You'll want time to settle and rest before dinner." Annabeth felt a twinge of disappointment that surprised her. After his big speech in church, she'd somehow expected, what? That he'd carry her straight to his bedroom? The thought made her cheeks warm, and she was glad for the evening shadows that might hide her blush. "That's kind of you," she said, matching his tone. "I'd like to change into something more practical." She followed him into the house, her boots clicking on the polished wood floors. The inside was nicer than she expected, with solid furniture that showed good taste, but it was definitely a man's house. A stone fireplace filled the main room, and above it hung the rusty branding iron she'd noticed yesterday. "That was my dad's," Bo said, seeing her look. "Thomas Rollins. He died at Gettysburg before he could build anything lasting. I've been building for him ever since." The simple words hit her hard. "He'd be proud of what you've done." "I hope so," Bo pointed to a hallway. "Your room's this way." The guest room was nice and cozy, with a window looking out over the barn and fields. Her trunk was at the foot of the bed, and her bag was on the dresser. Someone, probably Mrs. Chen, had left fresh towels and a pitcher of water. "Dinner's at 6, Bo said from the doorway. "Mrs. Chen's a great cook, but starting tomorrow, running the house will be your job." After he left, Annabeth sat on the bed, looking around her new space. It was comfortable, but it felt temporary, like a place for a visitor, not a wife. She wondered how long she'd sleep here and what would change that. From her bag, she pulled out her most precious thing, sheet music for Chopin's Nocturne, in E-flat major, the last piece her mom played before she got sick. The pages were worn, some stained with tears from quiet moments. As she smoothed them and tucked them in the dresser, Annabeth felt like she was putting away the last piece of her old life. She changed out of her wedding dress into a plain gray wool dress, more practical but still nice for out here. When she went down for dinner, she found Bo in the dining room, clean and in a fresh shirt. He stood when she came in, a polite move that showed good manners despite his rough look. Mrs. Chen was a small, busy Chinese woman who spoke little English but said a lot with her expressive face and quick hands. The dinner she made was simple, but tasty. Roast beef, potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread with butter made that morning. "Mrs. Chen's been with me for 3 years, Bo said as they ate. Her husband worked on the railroad until he died in an accident. She needed a job, and I needed someone reliable to run the house. She's a gem, but she's getting older and could use help with the heavy stuff." Annabeth nodded, storing this info about her new duties. "What time does the house usually wake up?" "I'm up before dawn to check the cows and give the workers their jobs. Mrs. Chen starts breakfast around 5. The men expect to eat by 6, so they can ride out by daylight." 5 in the morning. Annabeth had rarely been up before 8, and never by choice. But she just nodded. "I'll need to learn your routines and what you like. Maybe Mrs. Chen can show me the kitchen tomorrow. She'd like that. She's been worried about handling everything alone much longer." They finished dinner with polite talk about the ranch and the townsfolk. Bo was a good host, keeping her water glass full and making sure she had enough food. But there was a distance between them, a formal politeness that felt odd after their big moment in church. When Mrs. Chen started clearing dishes, Annabeth stood to help, but the older woman shooed her away with fast Chinese words and gestures that clearly meant the new bride shouldn't work on her wedding night. "She says it's not right," Bo translated with a small smile. "You're the lady of the house now, and she takes pride in her work." Annabeth felt weird standing there while someone else cleaned up, but she saw the delicate balance involved. Tomorrow she'd start taking charge, but tonight she was still finding her place. "Want to see the rest of the house?" Bo asked. He showed her around with quiet pride. His study with a roll-top desk and shelves of farming magazines, the living room with cozy chairs by the fireplace, the big kitchen with a modern wood stove and a stocked pantry. Everything was clean and well kept, but it lacked a woman's touch to make it a home. "It's really nice," Annabeth said honestly. "You've built something solid here." "It's a good start," Bo agreed. "But it needs—" He paused, searching for words. "A woman's touch?" Annabeth suggested. "A family," he said simply. "A house is just walls until there's a family in it." They stood in the living room, the evening light casting long shadows. Annabeth was very aware of being alone with this man, her husband, of the closeness expected and the strangeness that made everything unsure. "Bo," she started, then stopped, not sure how to say what she was thinking. He turned to face her, patient. "What is it?" "In church today, when you talked about what you wanted, I meant what I said back. I want to be the partner you need, but I should be honest. I don't know a lot, like—" Her cheeks warmed. "I've never run a house this big. I've never cooked for working men or kept ranch books. I've never—" She paused, then pushed on. "Been married before. I know what's expected, but I don't know the real stuff." Bo studied her with his sharp, dark eyes. "Are you asking for time to learn or for me to be patient?" "Both, I guess." He nodded slowly. "I'm not expecting you to change overnight, Annabeth. If I wanted a woman who already knew ranch life, I'd have married a local girl. I picked you because I saw strength and smarts in your letters. Those matter more than experience. And the other parts of marriage—" Her words rushed out and she wished she could take them back. But Bo didn't seem shocked by her honesty. If anything, he looked kinder. "That'll happen when you're ready. We've got time to get comfortable with each other first." Relief washed over her, followed by a hint of disappointment. "Thanks for understanding. We're partners. Now, Annabeth, partners talk about what they need." As she got ready for bed in the guest room, Annabeth thought about how strange her situation was. She was married to a man she barely knew, committed to a life she'd never lived, in a place as foreign as another country. Yet Bo's straightforward honesty made her feel safer than all the fancy manners she'd left behind in Philadelphia. Tomorrow, her real learning would start. Tonight, she was just a bride trying to sleep in a strange bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier night, wondering what kind of woman she'd become in this new life she'd chosen. Annabeth woke to darkness and men's voices outside her window. For a moment, she lay confused, not sure where she was or why her bed felt different. Then it all came back. The wedding, the new house, her life as Mrs. Bo Rollins. The clock on her nightstand showed 4:30. Through her window, she saw lantern light moving between the barn and bunkhouse as the workers started their day. Somewhere in the house, she heard Mrs. Chen quietly preparing breakfast. Annabeth got up fast and put on her plainest, dark wool dress, pinning her hair back simply to stay neat while she worked. When she reached the kitchen, she found Mrs. Chen at the big wood stove, stirring something that smelled like coffee and porridge. "Good morning," Annabeth said softly. Mrs. Chen turned and smiled, pointing to the coffee pot happily. She poured a cup of strong black coffee and handed it to Annabeth, then pointed to herself and said slowly, "Mei Chen." "Annabeth," she replied, pointing to herself. "Mrs. Rollins now, I guess." Mrs. Chen nodded and started a fast explanation in Chinese, pointing to the stove, pantry, and dining room. Though Annabeth didn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. This was how mornings worked, and Mrs. Chen was ready to teach her new boss how to feed 8 hungry workers plus Bo. For the next hour, Annabeth watched and tried to help as Mrs. Chen made what seemed like food for an army. Stacks of pancakes, slabs of bacon, scrambled eggs, fried potatoes, biscuits with gravy, and canned fruit. Everything was made in huge amounts and served in sturdy dishes that could handle rough use. Bo appeared in the kitchen doorway just as Mrs. Chen plated the last pancakes. He looked clean but ready for work, in tough pants, boots, and a wool shirt with rolled-up sleeves. In his hand was an old military medal he'd pulled from somewhere private. "You're up early," he said to Annabeth, sounding pleased but not shocked. "I want to learn how things work," she replied. "Mrs. Chen's been patient with me not knowing stuff." Bo translated this to Mrs. Chen, who smiled and patted Annabeth's arm. The older woman said something fast in Chinese, and Bo chuckled. "She says you've got good instincts and willing hands. That's big praise from Mrs. Chen." As they carried food to the dining room, Annabeth got her first look at the workers she'd helped care for. They were a mixed bunch, some young, some older, all lean and weathered from outdoor work. They took off their hats when she came in and mumbled hellos, but she could see them sizing her up curiously. Jake Morrison, the foreman, was a man in his 40s with smart gray eyes and a natural way of leading men and cows. He introduced the others, Tommy and Pete, teenage brothers, Carlos, a quiet Mexican man good with horses, Old Sam, who'd worked cattle since before the war, and three others whose names Annabeth tried to remember while pouring coffee and making. Sure, everyone had enough food. Breakfast talk was about ranch work, which fields needed checking, where to move the cows for better grass, what fences or tools needed fixing. Annabeth listened hard, trying to catch the rhythm of this new world. After the men left, she helped Mrs. Chen clear dishes and started her real lessons in frontier housekeeping. The kitchen was well set, but everything was bigger than she was used to. The stove ate wood fast. Water for dishes had to be heated and carried from a pump by the back door. The pantry held huge sacks of flour and beans measured in hundreds of pounds. Mrs. Chen was a patient but strict teacher, showing Annabeth how to keep the stove fire hot without wasting wood, how to test the oven heat with her hand, how to measure food for big groups. When Annabeth messed up, and she did a lot, Mrs. Chen corrected her with kind gestures and repeated examples. The morning flew by in a blur of new tasks. By the time the men came for lunch, Annabeth felt like she'd worked for days, not hours. Her back ached from bending over the stove, her hands were red from hot water and soap, and she was starting to see why frontier women aged fast. But she also felt something new, a sense of purpose. In Philadelphia, her days were filled with visits, sewing, and other polite activities that seemed pointless now. Here, everything she did mattered to the people counting on her. The bread she helped bake fed men who worked hard. The coffee she learned to make warmed them on cold mornings. The meals she cooked gave them energy for tough jobs that kept the ranch going. After lunch, while Mrs. Chen rested in the heat of the day, Annabeth explored the house more. In Bo's study, she found account books showing the ranch's money in neat, manly handwriting. The numbers told a story of steady growth, but also big costs and constant risks from weather, market prices, and a dozen things that could go wrong. She was reading a ledger about feed costs when she heard footsteps. Bo appeared in the doorway, his shirt dusty and hair damp with sweat. "Find anything interesting?" he asked, nodding at the books. "You keep good records," she said. "These show nice profits, but also some big risks. The loan payments for the new land are a lot." He stepped in, looking surprised. "You know bookkeeping? I helped with my dad's business books for years before." She paused, then went on. "Before things got tough, I know a bit about managing money." Bo sat across from his desk, looking at her with new interest. "That wasn't in your letter. You didn't ask about business skills. You asked about housework and willingness to work." "Fair enough." He leaned back. "What do you think of the ranch's money situation?" Annabeth looked at the ledger, choosing her words carefully. "You've built something great, but you owe a lot to do it. The ranch makes money, but there's not much room for mistakes if a bad year hits." "That's a good take," he said, his voice showing respect. "Most women wouldn't see the risks in the numbers. Most women aren't taught to. My dad thought daughters should understand money like sons." They talked for an hour about ranch work, markets, and Bo's plans to grow his business. Annabeth relaxed as they discussed practical stuff, feeling more like herself than since arriving in Colorado. When evening came and the men returned for dinner, she helped serve with growing confidence. The workers seemed more at ease with her, and a few complimented the cornbread she'd helped make with Mrs. Chen's guidance. After the kitchen was clean and Mrs. Chen went to her room off the pantry, Annabeth and Bo sat in the living room with coffee and the quiet of a good day's work. "You did great today," Bo said finally. "Mrs. Chen's impressed, and she's hard to impress." "I've got a ton to learn. We all do. But you're doing it right. Watching, listening, asking when you need to." He paused, then added, "I found something today I thought you should have." He handed her the military medal she'd seen that morning. It was old, on a faded ribbon, with words she couldn't read in the dim light. "They gave me this after a battle in Georgia," he said quietly, "for leading my men through something that should have killed us all. I've kept it all these years, but I'm not sure why." Annabeth turned the medal in her hands, feeling its importance. "It shows courage under pressure, taking responsibility for others even when things are unsure. Maybe, or maybe it just means I survived when others didn't." His voice was soft, far away. "I've had nightmares about that battle for 15 years. Always the same, hearing the guys who didn't make it calling for help I couldn't give." His raw honesty tightened her chest. Without thinking, she reached across and put her hand on his. "You can't save everyone, Bo. Sometimes surviving is the best anyone can do." He looked at their hands and some tension left his shoulders. "Maybe that's why I needed someone strong beside me, so I wouldn't have to carry it all alone." When she went to bed, Annabeth placed the medal in her dresser next to her mom's sheet music. Two keepsakes from their pasts, carrying the weight of their losses. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and lessons, but tonight she felt she was starting to understand the man she married and the woman she might become as his partner. 3 weeks into marriage, Annabeth stood in the kitchen holding the broken pieces of her mom's last teacup, crying in a way that wasn't just about the broken china, but about the woman she was turning into. The delicate cup had survived the trip from Philadelphia, her clumsy first tries at frontier chores, and was treasured as her last link to her old, fancy life. Now it was shattered on the rough kitchen floor, broken by her own roughened hands as she tried to juggle too many dishes after breakfast. She knelt to pick up the pieces, her calloused fingers carefully gathering each bit, as if she could fix what was broken. The biggest piece still showed part of the rose pattern her mom loved, painted in soft pink and gold that seemed too fragile for this world of iron and leather. "Mrs. Rollins?" She looked up to see Bo in the doorway, hat in hand, worry on his weathered face. He must have seen her through the window and come to check. "I'm sorry," she said fast, wiping her eyes. "I know it's silly to cry over a cup, but it was my mom's. The last piece of her china." Instead of brushing it off, Bo crossed the kitchen and knelt beside her. His big hands helped pick up the pieces, handling them gently. "Tell me about her," he said softly. The simple question broke something in her chest. "She was beautiful," she started, her voice shaky. "Not just in looks, though she was pretty. She made everything around her more elegant. She could turn a plain meal into a fancy party, make anyone feel at home." Bo kept gathering pieces while she talked, his moves careful and kind. "She played piano so well. Mozart, Chopin, Beethoven, she made the keys sing. Every night after dinner, she'd play for me and my dad. It was—" Her voice broke. "The happiest time in our house." "What happened to her?" "Tuberculosis. The doctors tried everything, but she got weaker until—" She couldn't finish. Bo placed the last piece in her palm and closed her fingers gently. "How old were you?" 18. Old enough to know she was dying. Young enough to think love could stop it. Annabeth looked at the broken china. "Dad was never the same. The business started failing within a year, though I didn't know then it was because he lost his drive." They sat quietly, surrounded by the morning sounds of ranch life outside. Finally, Bo spoke. "My mom used to sing while she cooked, old Irish songs her grandma taught her. I can still hear her voice sometimes when I'm alone in the fields." Annabeth looked at him, surprised. In 3 weeks, he'd barely mentioned his family beyond their deaths. "She'd have liked you," he went on. "She always said a woman's strength wasn't in being soft, but in what she'd do for the people she loved, even if she breaks dishes or burns bread." A small smile tugged at his mouth. "Especially because you keep trying, even when you break dishes or burn bread." His words warmed her chest. She'd been so focused on her mistakes, her lack of skill, her struggle to keep up with ranch, Life that she hadn't noticed Bo watching her efforts with approval, not judgment. "I feel like I'm losing bits of myself every day," she admitted. "My hands are rough. My skin's tanned from the sun. My dresses are stained with stuff I can't even name. Sometimes I look in the mirror and wonder where the fancy lady from Philadelphia went." "Maybe she's becoming something better," Bo said gently. "Stronger, more real." He helped her stand, his hands warm on her arms. For a moment, they stood close in the morning light, and Annabeth felt something deepen between them, a new understanding, a connection beyond their practical deal. "I should get back to the men," Bo said finally, but he didn't move right away. "Of course." Annabeth smoothed her apron, suddenly aware of her tear-streaked face and messy hair. "I need to start lunch anyway." But as he turned to go, she grabbed his sleeve. "Bo, thanks for understanding about the cup, for seeing something in me I'm not sure I see yet." His dark eyes held hers. "Give it time, Annabeth. You're stronger than you know." After he left, she swept up the last bits of china and threw them out, but their talk stayed with her as she worked. That afternoon, when Mrs. Chen was resting and the house was quiet, Annabeth found herself in the living room, staring at the piano in the corner. It was a nice instrument, well kept, despite being out here. Someone, probably Bo, kept it tuned, though she'd never heard it played. Her fingers traced the bench, remembering evenings at her mom's side, learning to make music. Without really deciding, she sat down and opened the keyboard. Her hands found the notes for her mom's favorite Chopin nocturne. The sound filled the empty room, sweet and sad, and so familiar. She played it once, then again, losing herself in the music that had been her mom's gift. For a few minutes, she was back in her childhood parlor with its silk walls and crystal chandelier, smelling her mom's rose perfume. When the last notes faded, she saw Bo in the doorway, his face unreadable. "I didn't mean to bother you," she said quickly, moving to close the keyboard. "I know you were working." "Don't stop." His voice was quiet but firm. "Please. It's been ages since there was music in this house." She turned back to the piano, her heart racing. "What do you want to hear?" "Whatever you want to play." So she played Mozart's soft sonatas, Bach's crisp pieces, Beethoven's bold crescendos. Her fingers remembered songs she thought she'd forgotten, melodies that had been part of her life for years. The music filled the house, bringing warmth to spaces that had only known work for too long. When she stopped, her hands tired from playing, she saw Bo had settled into a chair to listen. His face showed such deep peace that it took her breath away. "That was beautiful," he said simply. "Your mom taught you well. She always said music was something no one could take away. Even when everything else was gone, the songs stayed." Annabeth's fingers rested on the keys. "I'd forgotten that somehow. I was so focused on being what I thought you needed that I lost sight of what I could bring from my old life." "You don't have to pick between who you were and who you're becoming," Bo said. "The best partnerships take what each person brings and build something new together." That evening, after feeding the workers and cleaning the kitchen, Annabeth played again while Bo worked on ranch books at his desk. The music seemed to calm them both, bridging their different worlds. Later, Bo surprised her by moving to sit beside her on the piano bench. "Show me," he said, putting his big rough hands on the keys next to hers. "Show you what?" "How to make music. I can't play, but I want to understand how you make such beauty." She guided his fingers to a simple tune, teaching him how to press the keys just right. His hands were too big and clumsy for real music, but his focus and interest touched her more than any perfect performance could. "It's harder than it looks," he said with a grin after struggling with a basic scale. "Everything worth doing is harder than it looks," she replied, then realized how true that was. Ranch work, marriage, building a life with someone you barely know. It's all tougher than it seems, but worth it. She looked at his face in the lamplight, seeing the strong jaw, the small scar from some old injury, the careful way he still tried to play the keys. "Yes," she said softly, "worth it." When they said goodnight and went to their separate rooms, Annabeth felt something big had changed between them. She was still in the guest room, still learning how to navigate marriage out here. But the walls between them felt less solid. As she got ready for bed, She realized she hadn't thought about the broken teacup in hours. The loss still hurt, but it didn't feel like she'd lost everything she was. Instead, it felt like the kind of breaking that sometimes comes before new growth, painful, but with a purpose. Outside, she heard the ranch at night, cows settling, horses moving in the corral, a coyote calling in the distance. These sounds were becoming familiar, part of her new life's rhythm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new chances to prove she could handle the partnership Bo offered. But tonight, she fell asleep with music in her mind and the memory of her husband's hands trying to follow hers on the piano, a small gesture that hinted at bigger possibilities for the life they were building together. The branding season brought neighbors from ranches across 3 counties, their wives and kids along for work and a chance to visit. Annabeth had been nervous about the event for weeks, knowing it'd be her first big test as the Rollins Ranch's boss lady in front of the wider community. She stood at the kitchen window, watching wagons roll in, her stomach tight with worry. The women getting down from the wagons looked tough and worn, dressed in practical clothes showing years of hard use. They moved like they belonged in this land, like they'd earned their place through long years out here. "They're gonna judge me," she whispered to Mrs. Chen, who was kneading bread dough at the kitchen table. Mrs. Chen looked up, said something fast in Chinese, then switched to slow English. Good women, they help, you see. But when Annabeth stepped onto the porch to greet the guests, the looks she got weren't exactly warm. She heard whispers stop when she got close, saw eyes sizing up her still soft look and finding it lacking. "So you're the Eastern bride," said Martha Kellerman, wife of the rancher whose land touched the Rollins place to the north. She was a strong woman in her 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes, clearly a leader among the ranch wives. "We were all curious to meet the woman who finally caught Bo Rollins." "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Kellerman," Annabeth said, holding out her hand. "I hope I can help with the work today." Some women swapped looks Annabeth couldn't read. Ruth Morrison, the foreman's wife, stepped up with a kinder smile. "We always need extra hands during branding," she said nicely. "It's a busy time for everyone." The morning was a whirlwind of sorting cows and setting up branding fires. Annabeth tried to be useful, but quickly saw the other women had routines from years of working together. They moved through their jobs smoothly, while she struggled to understand the basics. "Careful with that iron, honey," Martha called when Annabeth picked up a branding tool. "Those aren't living room decorations." The snarky tone stung, but Annabeth forced a smile and asked for help. She spent the morning learning to heat the irons right, to know when they were ready, to hand them to the men at the perfect moment. Her hands soon blistered from the heat. Her dress got smoky and dirty, but she kept going. Lunchtime brought the real test. The women set up long tables in the house's shade, piled with food each family brought. Annabeth had worked since dawn, making her share. Roast beef, cornbread, green beans with bacon, and apple pie from the ranch's small orchard. She'd been proud, thinking she was getting the hang of frontier cooking, but as the women served and tasted each other's food, she realized her mistake. "This cornbread's real fine," said Susan Wheeler, wife of a smaller rancher from the South Valley. "Almost like cake. Is this how they do it back east?" "The beef's tender," another woman added, "but it's kind of bland. Needs more spice." Each comment came with a sweet smile, but Annabeth heard the criticism. Her food was too fancy, too mild, too different from what these families liked. "I'm still learning," she said quietly, her cheeks burning. "Oh, we all had to learn. Once," Martha said with fake kindness. "Of course, most of us started cooking as girls, helping our moms feed ranch hands and family. I guess it's different when you've had servants." The comment hung heavy. Annabeth felt every eye on her, waiting to see how she'd handle the jab. "You're right," she said finally, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "I had an easier life back east. I had servants, nice clothes, and never worried about food on the table. But that life's gone, and I'm trying to build something new here." "Are you?" Martha's tone was doubtful. "Or are you just playing ranch wife until you get tired and go back to comfort?" Before Annabeth could answer, a commotion broke out by the cattle pens. Men shouted warnings, and she saw Bo and others running toward the corral where branding was happening. "Bulls loose!" Someone yelled, "Get back, everyone!" The women stood as one, years of frontier life telling them a loose bull was serious trouble. Martha and the others started herding kids to the house, moving fast and sure. But Annabeth found herself heading the other way, drawn by some gut feeling toward the danger. Through the dust, she saw a huge breeding bull had broken free and was charging at a group of men scrambling to get clear. One figure wasn't moving fast enough. Young Tommy Morrison, barely 18 and still learning, had tripped and fallen right in the bull's path. The bull, wild with noise and smoke, was heading straight for him. Without thinking, Annabeth grabbed a branding iron from the fire and ran toward the corral. She heard women scream behind her, saw Bo racing to stop the bull from the other side. But she was closer and there was no time to think. She reached Tommy just as the bull lowered its head to charge. The beast was massive, easily 2,000 pounds of muscle and anger. But Annabeth had grown up around her dad's carriage horses and knew even big animals reacted to boldness. She stepped between Tommy and the bull, raising the hot iron like a weapon and yelling, "Get back! Get back, you dumb animal!" The bull skidded to a stop, startled by this small woman showing no fear. For a second, they stared at each other, locked in a battle of wills that could go either way. Then Bo arrived with a rope, along with Jake Morrison and 2 other cattlemen. Together, they got a line around the bull's neck and led it back to the pen, but not before it showed how dangerous the moment was. "Tommy, you okay, son?" Jake called, helping his brother up. "Yes, sir," Tommy said shakily. "Thanks to Mrs. Rollins. She saved my life." Annabeth stood frozen, still gripping the iron as she realized what she'd done. She'd faced a charging bull, something that could have crushed her like a bug, and come out okay. "Annabeth," Bo's voice was rough with feeling as he came to her. "That was either the bravest or dumbest thing I've ever seen." "Probably both," she said, her voice wobbly as the adrenaline faded. He gently took the iron from her hands and pulled her close, holding her tight while she shook. She felt his heart racing, heard the fear in his breath that showed how close they'd come to losing something big. When they stepped apart, Annabeth faced a circle of ranch wives whose faces had completely changed. Where there'd been doubt and judgment, now there was clear respect. "Well," Martha Kellerman said finally, "I guess that proves you've got the guts for ranch life." The rest of the day was a blur of congratulations and new acceptance. The women who'd been cool that morning now included her in their talks, asked her opinions, and shared their own stories of frontier dangers. That evening, after the neighbors left and the ranch settled down, Annabeth and Bo sat on the porch, watching the sunset turn the cliffs gold and red. "You surprised everyone today?" Bo said quietly. "Including me. I surprised myself," she said, touching her sore throat from yelling at the bull. "I don't know where that came from. I just saw Tommy in trouble. And you acted without thinking about yourself or the risks. That's not something you teach, Annabeth. That's just who you are." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling his solid warmth and the quiet strength that had drawn her to his ad in the first place. "The other women accepted me after that. Like facing the bull proved something. It did. It proved you're one of them now, that you belong here." As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Annabeth realized something big had shifted inside her. The fancy Eastern lady who'd stepped off the train 6 weeks ago wouldn't have grabbed a hot iron and faced a bull. That woman would have screamed and fainted, leaving heroics to others. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, and tougher than she'd ever dreamed she could be. Someone who belonged on this ranch, who could stand equal with the big man who was now her husband. When they went inside for the night, Bo paused at the stairs to their separate rooms. For a moment, the air between them buzzed with possibility, with the sense that their bond had crossed a new line after the day's drama. "Annabeth," he said softly, touching her face gently, "you were amazing today." Before she could answer, he leaned down and kissed her, not the careful kiss of their wedding, but something deeper, full of real desire and growing love. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands in his hair as she pressed against him. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, the unspoken question hung between them. Annabeth started, then stopped, unsure how to say what she felt. "I know," Bo said gently. "When you're ready, There's no rush. But as she got ready for bed in the guest room that was starting to feel like a cage, Annabeth wondered how much longer she'd need to be ready. The woman who'd faced a bull and earned her neighbor's respect was surely brave enough to take the final step to be a true wife to the man who was becoming so much more than she'd expected. The telegram came on a Tuesday morning, brought by young Billy Patterson, who rode for the town's telegraph office. Annabeth was in the garden behind the house, pulling weeds from the vegetable rows, when she heard hoofbeats. She stood, shading her eyes against the October sun, and watched Billy stop his sweaty horse at the porch. Telegrams were rare at the ranch, usually about cattle prices or business. This one was for her. "Mrs. Rollins," Billy called, waving the paper. "Got a wire for you from back east, marked urgent." Annabeth's stomach dropped. Urgent telegrams usually meant bad news, and she first thought something happened to her dad or brothers. She wiped her dirty hands on her apron and hurried to meet Billy. "Thanks," she said, taking the telegram with shaky fingers. Billy tipped his hat and rode off, leaving her alone on the porch with the unopened message. For a second, she hesitated. Something about the paper's weight and her name written formally felt like trouble, but ignoring bad news never made it. "Go away." She unfolded the telegram and read words that changed everything. "Annabeth, stop. Business recovered, stop. Father's investments paid off big, stop. Debts cleared with lots of profit, stop. Marriage not needed, stop. Come home now, stop. Easy life awaits, stop. Your brother, Charles." She read it 3 times before it sank in. Her family's money troubles, the disaster that pushed her into this marriage, were fixed. The business her dad thought was doomed had somehow paid off. The debts that seemed impossible were gone. Her sacrifice wasn't needed. The telegram slipped from her fingers to the porch floor. She sank into a wooden chair Bo had made, staring at the land she'd come to know over 2 months. The red rock. Cliffs glowed in the morning light. Cows scattered across the golden fields. In the distance, smoke rose from the bunkhouse where Mrs. Chen was cooking lunch. All of it, the ranch, the hard work, her change from city lady to ranch wife, was based on a misunderstanding. Or if not a lie, then a desperate bet her family made without telling her everything. They'd sent her west to marry while they waited to see if their failing business might recover. Now that it had, they were calling her home like a kid called in from playtime. Bo's boots on the porch made her look up. He was back from the morning's work, his shirt dusty, his face calm from a good day. When he saw her expression, he slowed. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice sharp with worry. Without a word, she handed him the telegram. She watched his face as he read, saw it shift from concern to confusion to something like betrayal. "Your family lied to you," he said finally, his voice tightly controlled. "Or they lied to me about how bad things were. I don't know which is worse." Bo folded the telegram carefully. "So, you'll be leaving?" The flatness in his voice hurt. "Is that what you think? That I'll pack up and run back to Philadelphia the second an easy life opens up? Won't you?" He looked at her straight, his dark eyes hard to read. "You married me because you had no choice, Annabeth. Now that you do, why would you stay?" The question hit like a slap. She stood, pacing to the porch railing as she tried to sort her feelings. "You think this has all been fake?" she asked. "The work, the learning, the connection we've been building? You think I was just making do with a bad deal? I think you're an honorable woman who's been trying to keep a promise, but promises can be broken when the reason for them is gone. Marriages like ours can be undone when the need goes away." She spun to face him, anger burning hot. "Is that what you want? For me to leave? Would it be easier to go back to your lonely life, your perfect ranch where no one messes with your routine or questions your ideas?" "This isn't about what I want," Bo said, but his voice hinted otherwise. "It's about you having choices you didn't have before. Your family's rich again. You could marry anyone, live anywhere. You don't have to settle for a rough cowboy in the middle of nowhere." "Settle?" She laughed harshly. "You think I've been settling? Haven't you?" He stepped closer, his hands clenched. 2 months ago, you were a fancy lady who'd never worked a hard day. Now you're milking cows, cooking for workers, facing down bulls, learning to shoot, keeping books to the penny, and playing piano at night while you pretend to read but really listen to the music," she cut in fiercely, "and lying, awake wondering when you'll stop treating me like a guest and start treating me like a wife." Her last words hung in the sudden quiet. Beau's face showed surprise, the distance he'd kept fading. "You want to be my wife?" he asked, his voice rough. "Really? Not because you have to, but because you choose to?" "I thought I made that clear," Annabeth said, tears pricking her eyes, but she held them back. "But I guess I was wrong. I guess you've been waiting for me to leave." "No." The word was sharp. "God, no. I've been trying not to hope you'd stay because I was scared." He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "Scared of what?" "Scared you'd realize you deserve better than this. Better than me." His voice dropped low. "I've been waiting for you to leave since you got here, Annabeth. Every morning I expect a note saying you've gone back where you belong." His raw honesty cracked something open in her. She stepped closer, close enough to see the fear he was hiding. "Where I belong," she said softly. "Beau, don't you get it? This is where I belong. Not because I have to be here, but because I choose to. Because in the last 2 months, this place became home." "And you became—" She stopped, the words catching. "I became what?" he asked, his eyes intense. "You became the man I love," she said simply. For a second, neither moved. Then Beau stepped forward, his hands framing her face as he searched her eyes. "You love me?" he asked, like he couldn't believe it. "Yes, you stubborn man. I love your grit and your honesty, and how you built this place with your own hands. I love that you see strength in me I didn't know I had. I love that you expect me to be your equal, not some pretty decoration." Her voice grew stronger. "And I love that you're brave enough to ask for what you really want instead of taking what's easy." "Annabeth, I'm not leaving," she said firmly. "Not because I have to stay, but because I want to. Because this is my home now, and you're my husband, and I'll be darned if I let my family's money fix ruin what we've built." He kissed her then, hard and desperate, full of relief, his arms pulling her close. She kissed him back just as fiercely, pouring all her love and determination into it. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Beau rested his forehead against hers. "I've been a fool," he said quietly. "I should have told you weeks ago how I felt, trusted that what we had was real. We've both been fools. I can't imagine life without you." "I love you too," he said, his voice thick with feeling, "more than I thought I could love anyone." As the storm raged, they held each other and planned their future, a future with kids and more. Cows, new challenges, and shared wins. The daily work of building something meaningful together in the frontier they both called home. The train ticket was ashes in the fireplace, but Annabeth felt no loss. She'd found something worth more than an escape. She'd found her true calling as a frontier woman, a ranch wife, and a partner to the man who'd pushed her to be more than she ever dreamed possible. The morning after the storm brought clear air and a snowy landscape, but also news that shook everything Beau and Annabeth had built. Jake Morrison rode up before breakfast, his face serious with bad news. "Bank examiner's in town," he said as Beau stepped onto the porch. "Word is he's calling in loans all over. Some money panic back east has the bank scared." Annabeth, feeding chickens in the yard, felt her blood freeze. She moved closer to hear, her mind racing through what this meant. "How bad?" Beau asked, his voice calm but tight. "Bad enough that Morton Kellerman lost his ranch yesterday. 20 years of work gone because he couldn't pay his loan when they changed the due date." Jake's face showed worry. "They say anyone with big loans needs to pay up now or lose everything." Beau's jaw tightened. Annabeth knew he was thinking of the big loans he'd taken to grow the ranch. Plans that made sense over years but were impossible if called in early. "How much time do we have?" she asked, stepping beside Beau. Jake looked surprised by her question but answered. "Examiner's checking the Rollins account tomorrow morning. If he calls in the loans—" He didn't finish, but the threat hung in the cold air. After Jake left, Beau and Annabeth sat at the kitchen table with the ranch's money records spread out. The numbers showed a harsh truth. The ranch made money and was growing, but most of their cash was tied up in land, cows, and gear. If forced to pay the loans now, they'd have to sell everything cheap, likely losing the ranch. There might be one way, Annabeth said slowly, looking at a letter from last week. My family's offer still stands. Charles said they'd help with money if I needed it. Beau's face hardened. No, Beau, be practical. Pride won't save the ranch. It's not pride. His voice was sharp with pain. Don't you see? If I take your family's money, everything they thought about me comes true. I become the rough guy who married their daughter for her connections. That's not what happened, and you know it. Do I? He stood, pacing to the window. Maybe this is what I deserve. Maybe I was kidding myself, thinking I could build something lasting out here. Annabeth watched him wrestle with old fears. In his stiff shoulders and clenched hands, she saw the boy who lost his parents, the soldier who lost friends, the man who'd built walls around his heart to avoid this kind of loss. Beau, she said, going to him and putting her hands on his shoulders. Look at me. He turned slowly, his eyes full of despair that broke her heart. You're not that scared kid anymore, she said firmly. You're not the soldier who couldn't save his friends. You're my husband, my partner, the strongest man I know. We'll find a way through this together. And if we can't, if we lose it all, we'll